Celiac disease or gluten intolerance tends to be one of the most misdiagnosed illnesses in medical practice today, which is why I felt so compelled to tell my story. So anybody out there who may be suffering from a similar situation can benefit from watching this video. So I'm Carly. For those of you who haven't seen my videos, I'm a plant-based nutritionist, and I typically get videos out every Monday and Thursday if I'm able to stay on schedule. These usually go into greater detail on all things plant-based. So in this video, I'm going to go over some of the first signs and symptoms I experienced, as well as some of the social struggles and quality of life impacts that this experience has had for me. I'm also going to go over some of the social struggles and quality of life challenges that I experienced. And then I'm going to discuss how to find the right doctor and where I am today with my symptoms and flare-ups. So, first signs and symptoms. These are very unusual because the majority of celiac patients actually are asymptomatic, which just means that they don't really have any symptoms. I wish I was one of those individuals. But another large percentage don't have any GI issues, which is just as confusing because if you aren't familiar with celiac disease, the small intestine is the major site of injury. So every time somebody with this illness ingests gluten, they actually have a autoimmune response that's triggered by the protein in the gluten. And that causes this inflammatory cascade that will flatten the villi in your small intestine, which are there to increase the surface area to absorb nutrients more efficiently. So people with this illness tend to have a lot of nutrient deficiencies, which is why their illness can manifest in such a variety of ways. Some of my first symptoms were things like bright red, hot, swollen fingers and hands, sometimes my ears even. If I just got done eating a bunch of pasta or if I had a beer or something, all of a sudden like my pinky would get bright red, or the tip of my pinky, or three of my fingers, or my hand, or both hands. It was always different, and there didn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to it. It took me a long time to connect the dietary component in my illness. So some other things were extreme fatigue. I could not get out of bed to save my life. And my sleep was terrible. There was a lot of insomnia. I also suffered from things like trouble concentrating and brain fog, and just general problems with cognition, as well as anxiety and depression. I'm not sure if that was, a causal factor of the illness or if it was because of the illness itself that, I was about 22, 23 years old when I was experiencing this. So it was a very scary thing to go through at such a young age. And when you've been so healthy your whole life and then all of a sudden your body starts to fall apart, it's hard to know how to respond to that, especially when everywhere you go for help seems to be anything but helpful. Some of my other symptoms that were more prevalent were things like migraines, joint pain, and muscle soreness. I didn't really have a lot of GI issues until later on. So that was part of the reason why it took so long to get a proper diagnosis. Moving on to the social struggles and quality of life challenges. So I felt these were really important because they were such red flags. I should have gone and gotten help a lot sooner. And that's what I hope you do if you are watching this and you have a similar situation, or if you've been struggling with different symptoms, but they've definitely had an impact in a negative way on your life. You don't have to suffer, and you certainly don't have to suffer alone. So some of the things I went through were like my friends and family, my social relationships really started to crumble and suffer. People weren't responding well to what was happening to me when I would try to explain my symptoms and what was going on in my body. They would quickly dismiss it as something that was just all in my head, or I was just trying to get attention, or just all sorts of crazy rationales. So my grades in college also started to plummet, and I am incredibly studious, so that was very concerning for me. I was no longer able to follow usual activities, such as just regular self-care. I stopped going to the gym. the way I used to, and I didn't do as many things that I would typically enjoy doing. My finances were also out of order. I started missing rent payments and car payments, and that's, again, very uncharacteristic for me. So these are all things that, it seemed like everything around me was falling apart, but it was really just because I was losing my health. And when you don't have your health, you don't have anything. That's your priority. And that's definitely a lesson that I learned through this experience. So the next thing I want to discuss is finding an appropriate doctor. This is Miss Ayana. She would like to join us. Let's see. So I didn't have a primary care physician. So that was my first problem, a significant problem. You need to stay with a doctor at least consistently enough for them to know your history and be able to find patterns in what's going on or what's going wrong with you. Due to that, due to not having a primary care physician, I started going to places like the urgent care and the emergency room every time I would have a severe flare-up, and they were absolutely no help. I mean, they're not set up for that. They help people with acute illnesses, not somebody who's suffering from something so chronic. And, all their symptoms are just basically deteriorating. So after I saw a number of doctors and psychiatrists, I was able to get referred to an immunologist who was also an allergist. Thankfully, this was the right combination of expertise that I required to have somebody pick up on the fact that what was happening with my hands turning bright red and inflaming and getting so swollen was that it was likely due to a dietary component. This specialist was able to connect the symptoms to the illness and ultimately gave me the tissue transglutaminase antibody level blood test. So this doctor was able to finally connect the dots and give me a proper diagnosis. If it weren't for him, it might have taken me quite a long time to come across an appropriate diagnosis. The majority of celiac patients take years to come across a doctor who is able to link their symptoms to the illness, or at least provide the proper the blood work. So where I am today with my symptoms and flare-ups, it's day and night from where I came from. It's also not something that will ever completely go away. It's always going to be a part of my life. I mean, I live in a society where gluten is literally ubiquitous. It's in everything. And I also live with people who do not eat gluten-free, so it's inevitable that I'm going to accidentally ingest it at some point in time. But when this does happen, the flare-ups are much more minimal. To give you a measurement of the degree that I have repaired my body from the damage that was done to this illness, the tissue transglutaminase antibody level that I got when I was first diagnosed, which this test is one of the gold standards for celiac disease, is just simple blood work. And they basically test for these antibodies, which is a natural part of your blood. You're supposed to have some of these antibodies in your system because you get them from your mother when you're a baby in her breast milk. So a normal range of these antibody levels is anywhere from 0 to 19. I had a 266 when I was diagnosed. Today, 10 and a half years later, I just got my blood work done a couple months ago and it was a 16. These doctors told me that I would likely never recover to the point where I could get back to a normal antibody level. And I'm right in the middle. So that's a great feeling. For anybody out there who is suffering from a similar situation or is just having all sorts of random symptoms and you're scouring the web for what's going on in your body and you can't find a rhyme or reason to it, don't stop until you get a diagnosis, because it's not in your head, it's real and it needs to be taken care of before it gets to a point where so much of your body has been damaged that it's irreversible. So I hope this inspires you. It took me years, like I mentioned, to come across just this whim of a doctor who could, get the light bulb and connect what was going on in my body. So if you want to learn more about gluten-free or plant-based nutrition, make sure you subscribe or hit that like button. I wish you the best of luck.